Hey everybody, and welcome to the ACE Football Academy. My name is Charlie Hamilton, this is Chris Dunham, and we have a very exciting episode here today to continue our conversation on recruitment and recruiting of high school athletes. Today we're going to be joined by Erica Suter. She is a college All-American, she is an author, she is a coach, she is all these wonderful things that we found her online. If you'll recall in the Don Williams video, we mentioned that cartoon that caught my eye on Twitter that led me to conversation with both Don Williams and Erica Suter. And so Erica has agreed to come on with us. Before we dive into the conversation, Erica is on Twitter at Fit Soccer Queen. And she also has her own website, and that is just ericasuter.com. That is SUTER. For those of you interested in checking her out. And I think you are going to want to check her out after listening to what Dunham, you and Erica had a chance to talk about.
Yeah. You never know who we're going to talk to and how they're going to be, but she was very informative. And so, number one, she was quite the player in high school. Got offers from like North Carolina, Maryland, and had the pick of the litter what she wanted to do. So she was top level type of player. Not to mention, after she graduated from Johns Hopkins, a Division III school, she did some coaching in Brazil, and then she started her own performance training business, and she was doing that for about 11 years, I think. So very informative, a lot of great information here from somebody who's been through everything and now can look back. And she's also training those same players to do what she did. So massive amount of information to throw out here. Please stay tuned. Take notes. If you're the student or you're the parent, great information here. Please be educated. Let's dig into Erica Suter here.
All right, this is part one of a two-part series.
All right, we're joined today by Erica Suter. She is a young female athlete, speed and strength coach, as well as many other things. Erica, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited.
Absolutely. So before we get started here, just so our listeners have an understanding of where you're from and what you got going on here, could you give us a quick background about maybe your academic history, your soccer history, or anything else you want to add in there for us?
Yes, I grew up in Maryland, and I played soccer since age 6 and actually was a recreational soccer player till about age 13, 14. And then I made the transition to play on the best team in the state at the time, Bethesda Soccer Club. And that was when I started my recruiting journey. And I was looking at D1 schools and getting some offers in Big Ten, A.C.E, and ended up choosing Johns Hopkins University, which is an amazing Division III program, and had a blast there for my 4 years. And then after college, I coached abroad in Brazil for a year as a volunteer program. And then after that, I came back to the States in 2012 and started my training business, which started as skills training for the first year. And then I realized that there was a need for youth soccer players to get the performance side and to really become strong and build their speed and athleticism so they performed at a high level but also stayed healthy. So I'm going on my 11th year of that, and now I'm actually in Tampa, Florida. I moved down here a few years ago, and I work with athletes in the ECNL, GA, but also recreational soccer players who just love working out and want to get better. So that's what I'm doing full time now.
And if I'm not mistaken, you also have your master's in science under, I think, exercise and things under that agenda?
Yes. So somewhere in between that whole tangent I went on, I did go back to get my master's in exercise science. And that was when I had transitioned from skills to performance. So I was in my graduate program for 2 years while working full time. So I don't recommend people do that. It was definitely a stressful time, but I'm really glad I went back, and I also got my strength coach certification as well, and did a few college strength and conditioning internships too, to just really master my craft. And yeah.
That's great. I mean, you're obviously well accomplished in numerous areas, so I think you'd be a great benefit to our show here. So one of the first things I wanted to dig into was a few weeks ago, maybe a month or so ago, either you or Don Williams posted this cartoon where it showed two pathways to get to a certain college. And one pathway was going through ECNL, the highest leagues we can get into. And the other pathway was, quote unquote, leagues that are beneath certain players. And for someone like yourself that's been through the recruiting process, you played 4 years in college, and now that you're beyond all of that, what is your perspective of that cartoon that you put out there?
I remember that post for sure, and it definitely went viral in the Twitter world.
Right.
I think Don Williams posted that, and I found it interesting because I've seen it manifest with some of the athletes I've worked with and just with conversations I've had with people. And I don't want to say there's absolutes here, like, ECNL guarantees college or it doesn't, but I definitely think being on those higher level teams, you do increase your chance of getting exposed to colleges just with the showcase tournaments and the attendance of college coaches at those. But I also don't want to say that, being ECNL or GA is an end all be all and players who aren't there should lose hope. I used to work at the Johns Hopkins University ID camps several years ago as a recruiter, and I volunteered my time to do that. And some of the ECNL girls that were there were not the top players we picked. We picked girls who were consistent all days at the camp and who made an impact, and they surprised us. And we found out they were on ECNLR or maybe even lower level teams. So that was really interesting. And then just to give a few more examples, I have had conversations with girls who played on the top ECNL teams in the state, and they're uncommitted their senior year. But, that could be because they were chasing the wrong schools and they weren't looking for the right fit. But I don't think it is an end all be all. It does help, but people have to really be clear on, okay, well, ECNL is expensive and it is a commitment. And am I willing to do that even though the end result of playing for a top 25 school isn't guaranteed? And I think we need to be more transparent with players and parents who are paying these dues that that's the case. And I think a lot of people are failing at that.
Yeah, I think that's a great point here. And, in our area, we're in Richmond, Kentucky, which is about 20, 30 minutes south of Lexington, which is the largest city around us. And in our immediate area, the highest level programs just aren't within distance unless you're willing to travel an hour and a half, multiple times a week to get there. So I think your statements there have, a lot of validity to let kids know that there are no other pathways. ECNL isn't, like you said, the one all be all. There are other pathways because it's all about the talent. It's not about how much money your parents make. It's not about necessarily who you know, but coaches want talent on these teams. So I think it's important that you brought that up. And like I said before, Charlie and I love that cartoon that you posted out there. And I think has, a lot of merit for people to understand that there isn't just one way to reach your goal of reaching not just D1, but college in general.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think another misconception is, well, if you play ECNL, you're guaranteed to get into even like an Ivy League school. And no one talks about the academic side of it, the GPA you need, the rigor of your course load in high school. Those are minimum requirements for these top Ivy League schools, and there's not enough transparency around that as well. You can have the best ECNL player, but if she doesn't meet those academic requirements for a Princeton, a Harvard, a Yale, then she's likely not going to play there. And these schools are getting really strict with those requirements. And even Johns Hopkins, I look back and I had a solid GPA, but my SAT was average. And now they're requiring their soccer players to have, I believe it's now a 1500 or higher. So it's very competitive now. And I think we need to not just look at the club team, but all these other factors involved. And it really depends on the school you want to go to. And I think players need to really just weigh out what they want from a college experience, academics, soccer, social life, size of school. Like those are some of the big rocks everyone should be looking at first.
Yeah, and I love that you brought that up. Charlie and I have talked about the recruiting process here for the past few episodes. And one of the things that we make sure to point out is you're not going to college to play soccer. You're going to college to get a career. And I feel like when you're in high school, the process is exciting. Like you said, it's very competitive. You want to make sure the coaches think you have the best talent. But you're going to college for the rest of to learn a career for the rest of your life. And choosing that right school isn't about the name on the front. It's about the name on the diploma that you're eventually working towards. And because, like you said, not everyone's going to make it to the pros. And making it to the pros is even more competitive. So I think it's important that we're educating not just the players, but also the parents and understanding that if they don't have the talent to get to D1, there's nothing wrong with playing Division III or NAIA. You're still going to get that education, which is really the point of getting into college in the first place.
Absolutely. And I think NAIA and JUCO, I've watched some of the games and they're a high level and the coaching is better than some of the other top schools, right? The team culture is amazing. And, you also can transfer from that school. It could be a stepping stone, or you can stay there and do great and have a great experience. So I think that needs to be talked about more. And then you mentioned that most players, they'll go to college, yes, to play, but then when they graduate, they're jumping into the real world in a career. Even if they are going to play in the pros and their college experience is mainly about soccer, which some cases it is, professional career will end eventually. So you can't just put your identity in soccer. Yes, you want to master your craft, you want to, be committed to it, and that's your life, but you also have to be real with yourself, have other things going for you during that journey. So when your career does end, it's not as flooring, right? And I think we even see that with professional athletes who retire. Like even Tom Brady, he just doesn't want to lose that identity. You can tell like the sport has been his life, and that's why he was so good. But it can also be a curse in the sense when it's done, you're like, well, who the heck am I now? And that's not taught to our young athletes. And I think just really seeing that your identity is not just that, and it can be other things. And even Serena Williams retired recently. She had kind of an identity crisis, and she wrote an article about how, like the struggles of being a mom now and how like that's who she is now. And she wrote it in a way that was very kind of reluctant, a little bit resentful that she was leaving the game. And I found that unfortunate because I was like, well, you're a mom now. That is an amazing and purposeful thing. And I know that you became this amazing tennis player, but your value can be family now. That is incredible. So I just find it interesting with these professional athletes who retire. They don't know what to do.
Yeah, that's a great point. And like we talked about before, it's educating people that, you have a long life to live. And there's more to every person than just that one skill of soccer or whatever it may be that they're really good at as they're growing up, whether it be sports, music, or some fine arts situation. And one thing doesn't define each individual person. You know, let's say you get injured your first year as a pro and you didn't plan for it to end that early. Well, what are you going to do next? So we're always discussing, you know, you're preparing for your future, and it's not just 2 years down the road. It's what are you going to be 10 years down, 15 down, 20 down? Where do you want to be? Because things in life don't always go as planned, as I'm sure you've experienced. I know myself and Coach Hamilton have experienced. Life brings all kind of obstacles, and the more versatile you are, a more understanding of your self-worth, that it's not just one thing that defines you. So I think being prepared for the future and any random obstacle coming your way, you know, you're always ready for it, and having a good support system around you to be ready for those issues.
Absolutely. And I think it was Sarah Murray. She's the former sports psychologist for Brighton. She called it, I believe, proactive resilience. I might have butchered that, but the whole idea that you're being realistic about what could happen in the future. Your soccer career could end, you could get injured, your professional contract could be taken away. And it's like, okay, are you prepared for the possibility of that? And then how are you going to pivot? I think when we brush things under the rug and we don't think something could happen, that's when it gets dangerous, and we're not prepared when a bomb comes into our lives. We saw that during COVID too. I mean, no one had any clue that, you know, they would have to completely change how they structure their soccer club or their business, and they couldn't earn a living and they had to do something else. Like, that is a life altering thing for many people. And I think if people just don't have that resiliency to adapt, that's when things go wrong. And it's just interesting to see that there are a lot of kids putting that identity in just one thing. And it's like, no, you're way more than that. You got way more to offer, and you're going to have to offer way more one day. I can't tell you when, but it's going to happen.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we could talk about this for another hour or so.
I know.
Going back and forth about really it's just educating people and make sure they're properly prepared. So, as I said before, Coach Hamilton and I, we've been discussing a lot about recruiting, and knowing that you yourself are training young female athletes, and I'm sure you're, I guess, coaching them, preparing them for college, whatever it may be. Do you have any things that you see going on these days that kids in high school should be doing now that is going to effectively get them at least noticed by college coaches? Not necessarily recruited, but what actions should they be doing right now so coaches say, oh, I need to pay attention to player A here?
So I had this conversation with my friend Rachel Nuzzolese a couple weeks ago. She played at Wake Forest University, but she was getting looks from Santa Clara, Stanford, UNC, and she was the number one recruit in the country in the early 2000s. And she and I were talking about, yes, you have to put in the work and you have to develop all aspects of your game. You have to be technical, tactical, and be physically prepared. And we came to the conclusion that the physical side of the game gives the edge, because a lot of players can be pretty even technically and tactically, but then it's their speed that gives them that edge. And then also the strength and the fact that they can stay injury-free and be healthy for a long period. But we also talked about how a part of it is genetic, right? Like some players have it and some don't. Some players are going to be D1 and they can read the game well and they have a high soccer IQ and they just got it. And then some players aren't ever going to make it at that level, even if they do the same type of training, right? Some people just have it and some people don't. That doesn't mean you can't improve your average player. You absolutely can, technically, tactically, and physically. But again, it's coming back to being realistic with the level that you can compete at. So as an example, as far as speed training, I have some girls who are never going to be a top speed of a 17.5 to 18 mile per hour. And I'm sorry, but that's the speed you need to play for like the UNCs, the Santa Claras, and all those top schools. It's going to be very hard physically if you don't have that speed and that explosiveness at that level. And I think players just need to understand where they fit in. And that just comes back to, watching a lot of soccer, going to different ID camps and being honest with yourself with, okay, was I in the middle of the pack? Was I above everyone? And even asking the coach, well, where do you see me fitting in? And if you have that conversation early, it saves you a lot of time and money.
Yeah, and I like that you brought that up here. And one thing that we're trying to educate the players is you need to find the place that fits you, not necessarily focusing on the name on the jersey. Because I know as young athletes, they see stuff on TV, they see it glorified in some form or fashion, like the North Carolinas and the UCLAs and whatever it may be, and they think, oh my gosh, that would be amazing. But that doesn't mean you're going to fit in that type of atmosphere. Whether it be, put the physical side of it aside. We're talking about elite minds, elite athletes, elite coaching, and maybe you just don't fit that type of persona. And we try to educate, maybe you can go to a D3 school and then work your way up to a D1 where you are ready to fit in that type of mold. So I think you brought a great point here. The fit, at least in our opinion, finding the right fit is one of the most important things when you're doing your college research on where you want to go there.
I agree. And I thought I was going to play at UNC, right? I think a lot of people have that dream because they're all over social media and TV and they're just everywhere and you hear about their program. But as I went through high school, I realized, okay, I can probably play for a different D1, University of Maryland, University of Wisconsin, George Washington University, and DC all wanted me to commit. But even then, I was like, okay, I don't know if I will be an impact player and if I will play. So that's why I went to Hopkins, because the coach was like, you're going to start, you're going to make an impact, you're going to contribute to our program. And that excited me. And I did want to play, right? I didn't want to ride the bench. And maybe if I went to Maryland or Wisconsin, I would have played, but I don't think it would have been as much as Hopkins. I don't know. I'll never know looking back because I didn't try it, but I loved my time at Johns Hopkins University. I felt a part of the team. I felt I was making an impact. But then I also realized I loved the size of the school. I wanted a smaller school. And playing for Maryland or Wisconsin was the opposite of that. And I don't think I would have enjoyed that. So I loved the small classes. I loved the academics. I loved how close the soccer team was. I think that's another thing that girls overlook in finding the right fit is, like, you really need to get to know the team culture. Too often they pick the school and then the team is catty or the culture is not good and the coach isn't good. And then they're in this toxic environment and they're like, why did I end up here? And it's another 4 years. So you want to enjoy going to practice every day of the week. So that's an important aspect to look at. And that is definitely a part of finding the right fit, because it's another 4 years and you have to love doing it.
Yeah, and I like that you brought that up about choosing one school or the other due to playing time. Because, we've had previous conversations where one gentleman who's playing at Asbury, the coach told him, you're not going to come in as a freshman and you're not going to start. And he told himself, I'm okay with that. And so I think it's important that we understand and educate the kids that everybody's going to be different. Just like you want to go somewhere where you wanted to start right away. Where he went somewhere, he was understanding that I'm going to learn and I'm going to be mentored growing up. So again, we've talked about this before. Be realistic and understand what it is you want in that school and that program, because each one's going to be a little bit different, and finding that, like we said many times already, finding that right fit that fits you, that team, and that program there.
Yes, and I think if most players are honest with themselves, they do want to play minutes. They don't want to ride the bench and not get in. But there's some rare cases where they're like, look, if I'm on a good team, nationally ranked, I'm fine with riding the bench. And there are people who are okay with that. And you just need to figure out if that's you.
Absolutely. So speaking of the recruiting process, you brought up how you chose between Johns Hopkins and I think it was Maryland you mentioned, and a few others. Can you tell us about your own recruiting process? It's been a few years since you've graduated from the university. When you're in high school yourself and going through a recruiting process, and what you're going with now, training young females, has anything changed in the recruiting process that you've noticed between yourself and training the girls now?
People are going to laugh at how I got recruited, but I got seen at a high school state final. But I also got seen at, I believe it was the Jefferson Cup. The Hopkins coach came to watch a game there, and then he followed up and saw me at a state final for my high school team. But my high school team was very high level, and he was like right down the street, so it was convenient for him. So that situation is more realistic if it's an in-state school you're looking at. Back when I was growing up, we had showcases. The big ones were Jefferson Cup, San Diego Surf, Disney, Raleigh Showcase, Vegas. So those were back then, still going on now. The one thing we didn't have were the ID camps, and I'm so glad we didn't have those because we had, so ID camps, I think, became a thing when I graduated college in 2012. I don't know if I'm correct. Don Williams would know better than me, but we didn't have ID camps, and I got seen through just emailing the coach. I think it was my sophomore fall, maybe. I don't really remember. I just sent him my Jefferson Cup schedule and then my high school schedule, and then he came out to 2 games. And then after those 2 games, he was like, yep, you're going to be our left midfielder, and you're going to start as a freshman and be an impact player. And I was like, okay, I'm in. Like, I'll turn down these other D1 schools. I'm totally fine with that. Even though people thought I was crazy that I turned down an ACC and Big Ten school. But right. I really loved Hopkins. I loved my official visit. I think when you go on an official visit, you can just get a vibe of the campus and the team, and you get to watch a practice and some of the games. And I just really enjoyed it. So that's when I decided to commit to Hopkins. So that was my experience, a little bit different than what everyone's going through now. I think the ID camps, I give it to all the girls who go to these because they're so competitive. There's so many players there. They're expensive. It's extra travel. Sometimes you choose the wrong one and it's a waste of time. I just feel for everyone because it's changed so much since I went through the process.
So with the ID camps, how many athletes are showing up for these weekend ID camps? Is it, 20, 30? We're talking about a few hundred.
It depends on which ones you choose. So at Hopkins, we were getting anywhere from like 70 to 80 girls at a camp, which is a lot. Some of the bigger schools will have over 100, but they'll have like multiple coaches or multiple colleges there evaluating the girls. So yeah, it really depends on where you go. And it was interesting because when I was helping with the Hopkins ID camps, out of those 70 to 80 girls that were there were only two to three in that pool that I thought would be impact players. So that's like how competitive it is, even at the D3, the top D3 level. And that's why like my heart goes out to these girls, because it's so competitive and hard. And everyone's pretty solid at the camps, but only a few players will really catch your eye. And that's what college coaches are looking for at ID camps. They're looking for impact players to enter into their program and to compete with their seniors.
Yeah, and I feel it's going to be, with that many players, whether it be 70 players or 150, it's got to be difficult as a coach to properly evaluate that many kids and be efficient and really confident in your evaluations. I mean, you may see them in a drill, 3 or 4 times, I'm assuming, and while you turn away, maybe they've turned it on a little bit. So did you find it difficult to properly evaluate that many kids, or do you have enough coaches where you guys felt confident in your observations?
This is a really good question, because I had a terrible experience growing up when I was trying out for ODP. One year I didn't make the team, and I just noticed at tryouts that the coaches evaluating were not even looking, and they were goofing off. And they were like talking in a corner. Wow. So ever since that experience, when I was asked to do the ID camps at Hopkins, I wanted to make sure I was fully watching every player intently. And the way they set it up was each coach had 15 girls to look at and focus on, which was a really great setup. So it was easy for me, and we were playing like 11v11 games, so I was really only watching 11 at a time. Well, 10, because I wasn't recruiting the goalkeepers. That was our goalkeeper coach. So I was really looking at 10 players, and I just really wanted to make sure I was just watching everything and what everyone brought to the table because of my bad experience. And I don't know. I'm sure it still goes on at ID camps where coaches are kind of like looking at their phone or their clipboard and not even paying attention. It sucks because it's like these players travel so far to be there and put themselves out there. And for the coach to not look for 2 seconds, that's just wrong with me, right?
Yeah, it seems like they're undermining their own program. Like, if you're not going to pay attention, what's the point of having the ID camp in the first place?
Right. And I actually got a text from one of my athletes after an ID camp, and she said that the coaches were looking away when she was like playmaking. She scored like an upper 90 goal from like the 30-yard line, and just had these fantastic plays, and they just weren't even like there. And it's like, dang, like sometimes it's like luck, I feel,
Yeah, that's got to be deflating, realizing you gave everything you had and you felt like you're on your A game that day, and realizing no one noticed. It's got to be deflating as an athlete.
Yeah, it totally is. And and I would say like the same with even like showcases sometimes. Like the coach like has so many games to get to, so they might only watch like 10 minutes of your game and then go to the next field, right?
Yeah. I've noticed that myself on many occasions.
So yeah, but it's like interesting because like back when I was getting recruited, like the coach watched a full half. Like they had more time on their hands, but now there's just so much going on, so many games to get to and teams, and they're just spread so thin. So they have to just bop around and be at a field 10 minutes at a time.
Right.
That concludes part 1 of our 2-part episode with Erica Suter. Coach Dunham giving a really good interview with her. Lots of good stuff there. Episode 2 is even better. Stay tuned. This has been the ACE Football Academy.